When India speaks of strategic autonomy, it is not just a diplomatic phrase, it is a philosophy born out of history, of struggle, of resilience, and of an unshakable desire to remain in control of one's destiny. Jaishankar's recent words to the West were not only diplomatic statements, they were warnings delivered with calm confidence. He reminded the world that India does not dance to anyone's tune, not to Washington, not to Brussels, not to Beijing, not even to Moscow. India listens, but it chooses. And that choice is made not out of fear or external pressure, but out of principle and national interest. This matters because for too long, global power has been exercised in the form of pressure tactics. The West has often relied on the assumption that nations, when pushed hard enough, will bend. But India's voice is showing something different. It is showing that real strength comes not from saying yes, but from having the courage to say no. And that, my friends, is what rattles the West. When Jaishankar speaks, he strips away the illusion that influence is control. He reveals the truth: respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Now, let's pause and understand the psychology behind this. Pressure creates compliance, but compliance is temporary. Respect creates partnership, and partnership endures. The United States and its allies often confuse these two things. They think that by applying sanctions, by issuing warnings, by framing narratives, they can shape India's behavior. But India has flipped the script. By standing firm, by refusing to be boxed in, India has forced the world to approach it not as a follower, but as an equal. That shift is not just geopolitical, it is philosophical. It speaks to a deeper truth about human nature itself. When you stand for your values, you create a new standard by which others must measure themselves. And this is what frightens those accustomed to control. They see a nation that cannot be intimidated, a nation that calmly rejects pressure, and suddenly their power looks smaller. Think about this. When Trump speaks in his usual thunderous style, he aims to dominate the room. But when Jaishankar replies, he does so with composure, almost with chill precision, and yet his words carry more weight. Why? Because true strength doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to threaten. It simply asserts itself, and the silence after those words becomes more powerful than 1,000 speeches. This is the heart of strategic autonomy. It is not about rejecting the world. It is about choosing one's path without apology. India has chosen partnerships, yes, but it has also chosen freedom. It has built bridges, but it has also built walls where necessary. And in that balance lies the message to the West: respect us, don't attempt to manage us. There is also a deeper lesson here for every individual. Nations are like people. If you constantly seek validation from others, if you let others define your choices, you become dependent. But if you know your values, if you build your own strength, if you dare to say no when it matters, then suddenly the world must adapt to you. That is exactly what India is doing on the global stage. It is psychological independence turned into geopolitical strategy. And understand this, such independence is never easy. It requires the discipline to withstand pressure, the patience to endure criticism, and the confidence to know that short-term isolation is a small price for long-term dignity. That is why India's stand resonates so strongly. It is not arrogance, it is discipline. It is the ability to choose principles over convenience. So when Jaishankar looks at the West and says, essentially, we will decide for ourselves, it is not just a reply to Trump or any single leader. It is a declaration of identity. It is a statement that India's destiny will not be outsourced, not negotiated away, and not compromised for temporary gains. The West is shocked because it expected compliance. What it received was clarity, and clarity can be chilling, because once someone declares calmly and firmly that they cannot be broken, the game changes. The one who pressures suddenly realizes the limits of their power. And that realization, more than any threat, is what shakes them. Remember, this strength is not about loud declarations, it is about quiet certainty. India's reply to Trump is not just politics. It is psychology, it is philosophy. It is strategy, and it leaves us with one timeless lesson: when you refuse to be controlled, you force the world to respect you. When Trump speaks about India, he does it in the way he speaks about everyone: loud, forceful, almost transactional. His language is designed to establish dominance, to remind the listener who is supposed to be in charge. But here's the beauty of Jaishankar's response: he never plays that game. He doesn't try to match the volume. He doesn't try to win the war of words. Instead, he takes the higher ground, calmly asserting a simple truth: that India will engage with the United States only on the basis of mutual respect, not submission. That difference in tone is not accidental, it is deliberate. Because in life, just like in diplomacy, the one who remains calm under pressure always has the upper hand. Trump shouts, the West pressures, but Jaishankar replies with precision and composure. It's almost surgical, like a scalpel cutting through the noise. And what remains after the noise fades is a chilling silence. a silence that forces the other side to reflect. That silence is India's true weapon. Let's be clear, India is not rejecting America, it is rejecting domination. There is a crucial difference. Partnership with the United States is valuable, cooperation is possible, but it will never come at the cost of sovereignty. Jaishankar'S message is essentially this: if you want India as an ally, treat it as an equal. Don't mistake friendship for obedience. Don't mistake cooperation for compliance. Because once you try to dictate terms, the relationship collapses, and this is something the West is still learning to accept. For decades, the world has been divided into leaders and followers. But India is not applying for membership in someone else's club. It is building its own. This is why Trump's rhetoric falls flat against India's response. His dominance meets India's dignity. His pressure meets India's patience. And in that clash of styles, dignity always outlasts domination. There is also a deeper psychological truth here. Human beings, whether leaders or ordinary citizens, crave respect more than anything else. If you respect someone, you empower them. If you disrespect them, you awaken resistance. Trump's mistake, and indeed the mistake of many Western leaders, is to confuse control with influence. Control is temporary, but influence built on respect can shape history. Jaishankar is teaching this lesson not just to Trump, but to the entire Western bloc. He is saying, if you want India by your side, earn that place with respect, not demands. And think about how this applies to each of us as individuals. In our daily lives, we face people who try to dominate us with force, with manipulation, with pressure. Sometimes it's in the workplace, sometimes in relationships, sometimes even within ourselves when fear tries to control our choices. The temptation is to either submit or to fight with equal aggression. But there is a third way, and that is the way India demonstrates: calm, clarity, and the refusal to be diminished. You don't need to shout louder than your opponent. You just need to stand so firm in your principles that their shouting eventually exhausts itself. India's response to Trump shows us that strength is not about matching fire with fire. It is about refusing to let someone else dictate your worth. And that lesson is universal. The person who respects themselves commands respect from others. The nation that defines its own identity forces the world to recognize it. Now, make no mistake, this position is not easy. Saying, respect us, sounds simple, but living it requires sacrifice. It means turning down deals that come with hidden strings. It means facing temporary isolation rather than compromising on long-term principles. It means accepting criticism, even vilification, without backing down. And yet, that is the cost of dignity. That is the price of freedom. India is paying that price, and in return, it is earning something priceless: true sovereignty in an age of dependency. So when Jaishankar responds to Trump, it is more than a rebuttal. It is a message written into the DNA of a rising India. We will not be treated as pawns. We will not be spoken to as juniors. We will not be defined by anyone else's narrative. The only acceptable basis for this relationship is equality, nothing less. And that is what shocks the West, because they are accustomed to compliance. They are accustomed to nations bending under the weight of pressure. But India has shown them something new: a calm, unapologetic defiance, a style that doesn't rage or scream, but simply declares, respect is the only language we understand. Remember this: the louder someone tries to dominate, the more fragile their control. The calmer someone is in response, the stronger their position. India's silent message to Trump is the same message we can all carry into our own lives. Never trade respect for approval. Never surrender dignity for convenience. Never let someone else's dominance define your destiny. And so I leave you with this thought in your own life. Are you demanding respect through calm strength, or are you still chasing approval through submission? One path makes you dependent, the other makes you free. The choice, just like for India, is always yours. When Jaishankar spoke of India's ties with Russia, the West felt an uncomfortable chill. It wasn't just about oil deals or defense agreements, it was about leverage. For decades, the Western world operated under the assumption that they alone held the keys to influence. They believed nations would eventually orbit around Washington, Brussels, or London. But India reminded them that this world is no longer unipolar. By openly acknowledging its partnership with Russia, India showed that it has options, that it can build bridges where others expect walls, and that it can pursue its interests without waiting for Western approval. This unsettles the West because the Russia factor is more than a political choice. It is a psychological declaration of freedom. It says, we are not dependent on you. We are not trapped in your system. We are not waiting for your permission. For the West, that is a shocking reality because control thrives on dependency. When a nation demonstrates that it can thrive outside of Western frameworks, the illusion of dominance begins to crumble. Now, let's step back and understand why this alliance matters so much. Russia is not just a supplier of oil or weapons. It is a symbol of alternative power. For India, Russia represents a strategic partner that stood by its side in critical moments of history, long before the West even recognized India's true potential. To abandon that relationship simply because the West demands it would be to betray a history of trust, and India does not betray those who stood by it. That loyalty, that memory is a source of strength. But beyond history, there's a lesson here in strategy. If you rely on only one partner, you are vulnerable. If you keep your options open, you are free. This applies to nations, and it applies to individuals. India's embrace of Russia while maintaining ties with the US, Europe, and others shows the discipline of balance. It is not about choosing sides, it is about refusing to be cornered. This is what unnerves the West. They cannot dictate terms to a country that has more than one door open. Notice the contrast. The US often tries to isolate those it sees as adversaries, cutting them off from markets, from technology. But India refuses to play that game. Instead, it engages everywhere: America, Russia, Europe, the Middle East, Asia. By doing so, it multiplies its influence. If one door closes, another opens. If one hand withdraws, another extends. That is not weakness, that is strength. It is the strength of resilience, the strength of adaptability. And there's a psychological truth behind this. Dependency makes you fragile. Choice makes you powerful. Nations that depend on one source of support can be broken if that source is removed. But nations that build multiple partnerships cannot be broken. They can only be respected. This is why Jaishankar'S statement about Russia wasn't just foreign policy. It was a chilling reminder to the West that India cannot be trapped. The West thought that by punishing Russia, it could force others into compliance. But India has shown the opposite. By continuing its relationship with Moscow, it exposed the limits of Western power. It proved that sanctions are not universal laws. They are just tools of influence. And tools lose their power when people refuse to use them. That refusal is India's message, and the world is listening. There's also something deeply philosophical in this stance. Loyalty matters. Gratitude matters. The world is quick to forget, to discard relationships when they no longer seem convenient. But India remembers who stood by it in difficult times. That memory is not weakness, it is wisdom. Because the nation that forgets its friends is destined to stand alone. India is showing that respect and loyalty are not negotiable, even when pressured by the most powerful voices in the world. And here's where the message becomes universal again. In life too, you will face people who demand that you abandon your values, your friends, your principles, in order to gain approval. But if you betray those who stood by you, if you sacrifice loyalty for convenience, you lose more than trust, you lose your identity. India refuses to make that trade, and that refusal inspires others. So when Jaishankar calmly highlights the Russia factor, it isn't just about oil discounts or weapons contracts. It is about power. The power of choice, the power of loyalty, the power of independence. It tells the West you cannot corner us because we are not confined to your world. We have our own, and that is what chills them, because they realize the game is no longer theirs to control. The board has changed. The pieces are moving in new directions. And India is not playing by someone else's rules. It is writing its own. Remember this: whether you are a nation or an individual, your strength is measured by the options you create, the loyalty you honor, and the independence you protect. Dependency is weakness. Autonomy is power. So I leave you with this: are you building a life where you have options, where you cannot be cornered, where your loyalty is remembered and respected? Or are you still living at the mercy of a single door that could close tomorrow? If there is one thing that unsettles the West more than India's political independence, it is India's economic independence, because power today is not just measured in armies or alliances, it is measured in markets. It is measured in who controls the flow of money, resources, technology, and trade. For decades, the United States and its allies shaped this flow, and they believed it gave them leverage over every other nation. They thought, if we threaten the economy, they will bend. If we cut access, they will comply. But Jaishankar's statement revealed something that shook this assumption. India is not afraid of economic pressure. It is not afraid of sanctions, of warnings, of threats. Why? Because India has built resilience. It has diversified its trade, strengthened its domestic market, and created alternatives. In short, it has developed the confidence to stand on its own feet. And that, my friends, is economic defiance at its finest. Let's be clear, this is not arrogance, it is discipline. For years, India invested in building its own industries, in expanding trade beyond one bloc, in refusing to let its economy be captured by a single partner. That discipline now pays off. When the West says, "Don't buy oil from Russia," India replies, "We will buy what we need from whom we choose." When the West says, "Align your trade policies with us," India replies, "We align them with our people's interests." That calm defiance sends shivers because it shows the limits of economic coercion. And there's a deeper truth here. Control is always easier when someone depends on you. If you hold the keys to their survival, you control their choices. But once they no longer need you, your power evaporates. That's what is happening on the global stage right now. The West thought it could corner India by tightening the economic screws, but India has shown that it has multiple doors open. Trade with Russia, investments with the Middle East, partnerships in Asia, deals with Africa. And yes, even collaboration with the West itself, but always on its own terms. That is not isolation, that is freedom. There is also a psychological lesson here. True independence is not declared, it is earned. It is not about slogans, it is about building systems that cannot be broken. India has done this in trade, in technology, and energy. It has created resilience so that when pressure comes, it doesn't collapse. That is the difference between temporary strength and lasting strength. Temporary strength looks powerful until the first storm arrives. Lasting strength is built to survive every storm. And isn't this the same in our personal lives? How many people live dependent on one paycheck, one opportunity, one approval? How many put themselves in positions where someone else's decision can shatter their entire foundation? That is fragility. But if you build skills, if you diversify your opportunities, if you create your own independence, then no single person, no single system, no single boss can control your destiny. That is resilience. That is freedom. India is teaching the world this very principle. By refusing to let Western sanctions dictate its choices, it is saying, we will not starve ourselves to satisfy your politics. By continuing to trade where it finds value, it is saying, we will not destroy our growth to fit into your framework. This is not just economic policy, it is philosophy. It is the philosophy of self-reliance. It is the philosophy of courage. And this courage shocks the West, because for the first time, a major nation is refusing to play by their rules and yet thriving. The narrative was always that if you disobeyed, you would pay a heavy price. But India is showing the opposite, that disobedience, when grounded in strength, can lead to even greater prosperity. That realization is not just chilling, it is revolutionary. The bigger message is this: economic independence is not about cutting yourself off from the world. It is about entering the world on your terms. It is about saying yes when it benefits you and no when it compromises you. It is about being open to trade but closed to manipulation. That is what India is embodying, and that is why its rise is unstoppable. So let me ask you, how does this apply to you? Are you building your life so that your survival depends on one source, one approval, one fragile chain? Or are you building systems of resilience, multiple paths, multiple options? Because only one of those will give you freedom. India has chosen resilience. India has chosen independence. And in doing so, it has shattered the illusion that economic power equals control. The West may still pressure, they may still threaten, but the truth is clear now: they no longer hold the keys to India's future. And here is the lesson for all of us. True power is not given to you, it is built by you. And once you build it, no one, no threat, no force in this world can ever take it away. For a long time, the world was told a simple story: there is one center of power, one country that leads, and everyone else follows. After the Cold War, that story became louder. America declared itself the sole superpower, and many accepted it as permanent. But nothing in history is permanent. Empires rise and empires fall. Power is not a throne that one nation sits on forever. It is a tide that shifts with time, with discipline, with vision. And what we are seeing today is the emergence of that shift. We are watching a multipolar world unfold right before our eyes, and India is not just a witness to it. It is one of the architects. This is why Jaishankar'S statement to the West carried such weight. He wasn't simply speaking for India. He was speaking for a larger reality that many nations now recognize: the world no longer belongs to one power. The United States cannot dictate every decision. Europe cannot impose every standard. China cannot claim unchecked dominance. Russia cannot be written off as irrelevant. The truth is, power today is distributed. It flows in multiple directions. And India is at the heart of this new balance. What unsettles the West is that multipolarity means they can no longer control the script. They cannot predict outcomes with the certainty they once enjoyed. The rules are being rewritten not by one nation, but by many. And India is among those rewriting them with clarity, with confidence, and with an unshakable sense of identity. That is why Jaishankar'S calm defiance resonates, not just as India's stance, but as a symbol of this larger transformation. Now, let's look deeper. Multipolarity is not chaos, it is balance. Think of it like weights on a scale. When one side dominates completely, the balance breaks. Pressure falls on the weaker side and the system becomes unstable. But when multiple weights are spread evenly, the balance holds. That is the kind of world India envisions, a world where no single country can dictate terms to everyone else. That balance is not just political, it is psychological. It gives nations confidence, it gives them space to breathe, and it forces powerful players to respect one another instead of controlling one another. But make no mistake, multipolarity does not happen by accident. It happens because nations choose independence, because they invest in their own strength, because they refuse to bow under pressure. India's defiance on trade, its loyalty to old partners like Russia, its economic resilience. These are not isolated moves. They are part of a larger philosophy, a philosophy that says strength lies not in dependence on one power, but in cooperation among many. And there is a personal lesson here too. In our own lives, how often do we allow a single voice to dominate us? A boss, a critic, a partner, a fear. When we put all our worth into one source, we give away control. But when we create multiple anchors, strength in family, in work, in values, in self-belief, we become unbreakable. Just like nations, individuals thrive when they are not chained to one master. Multipolarity in the world reflects a deeper truth about resilience in life. Don't place your destiny in the hands of one force. Build balance, build strength across many areas, and you will never be broken. This is why India's stance is so inspiring. It is not about rejecting America or embracing Russia, not about siding with China or aligning with Europe. It is about refusing to let anyone define its future. It is about working with all without being owned by any. That balance is power. That independence is freedom. And that is why India's rise is shaking the world. It is proof that domination is no longer the future. Balance is. The West is shocked because it built its power on the idea that nations had no choice but to comply. But now, more nations are discovering their voices. They are realizing they can say no. They can choose alternatives. They can define their own course. India is simply leading the way, showing that this path is possible. And once one nation shows it, others follow. That is how revolutions begin, not with a shout, but with an example. And that is exactly what Jaishankar'S words represent, an example. They are not just a statement about policy. They are a declaration about philosophy. The philosophy of a multipolar world, a balanced world, a world where no one dominates and everyone stands taller. So, let me leave you with this reflection. In your own life, are you living in a unipolar world, where one fear, one dependency, one opinion defines you? Or are you building your own multipolar world, drawing strength from many sources, creating balance, refusing to let any single force control your destiny? Because just as nations rise through balance, so do individuals. And the moment you embrace that truth, you stop being controlled, you start being free. At the end of it all, Jaishankar'S message leaves the West with a truth they cannot ignore. India cannot be broken. They can pressure, they can threaten, they can criticize, they can even attempt to isolate, but none of it works. Because India has built something stronger than alliances, stronger than wealth, stronger even than weapons. India has built resilience. And resilience is the one thing you cannot conquer. Think about it. The West has tried different methods of influence. They have tried persuasion, convincing India that its future lies in obeying their structures. They have tried pressure, warning India against buying oil, against engaging with Russia, against asserting its independence. They have even tried guilt, framing India as neutral in conflicts where the West wanted a clear enemy. But none of these tools succeed. Why? Because India's sense of self is too strong. Its identity is rooted too deep in history, too deep in struggle, too deep in culture. You cannot break a nation that knows exactly who it is. And this is what unnerves them the most. For years, the assumption was that nations would eventually bend under enough weight. But India refuses. It absorbs the weight and it stands taller. That is not defiance for the sake of rebellion. It is discipline for the sake of survival. It is the calm, unshakable voice that says, we know who we are, and nothing you say or do will change that. Now let's pause here and recognize something important. Strength is not just about power, it is about endurance. Anyone can show strength for a moment. Anyone can raise their voice, flex their muscles, or make a threat, but strength that endures, strength that survives every storm, that is the strength that truly matters. And India has shown the world that kind of strength. This resilience comes from unity. A nation of over 1 billion people, speaking hundreds of languages, practicing many faiths, living in countless traditions, yet moving forward as one. That unity is India's shield. That diversity is India's power. No external force can break what internal resilience has already secured. And when Jaishankar speaks with such composure, he carries with him not just policy, but the weight of that unity. That is why his words resonate far beyond the room. And here is the deeper lesson for all of us. You cannot be broken if you are rooted in who you are. People may criticize you, they may doubt you. They may try to pressure you into giving up your values, but if your identity is strong, if your foundation is firm, then their power has no effect. Their words become noise, their threats become empty. Because nothing can shake someone who refuses to let go of themselves. This is what India represents on the global stage today. It is not just a country negotiating trade deals or defense partnerships. It is a symbol of resilience. A reminder that in a world where power tries to bend everyone into shape, there are still those who stand tall and unshaken. And that reminder is chilling for those who depend on compliance to maintain control. The West looks at India and sees a country that cannot be divided, cannot be manipulated, cannot be owned. That realization forces them to change their approach. Instead of dictating, they must now negotiate. Instead of demanding, they must now respect, and once given, changes the entire game. So let's bring this back to you. In your life, how often do people try to break you? Maybe through criticism, maybe through pressure, maybe through expectations that don't match who you are. And how often do you give in? How often do you let someone else's voice be louder than your own? If you want to live free, if you want to live strong, then you must do what India is doing. You must build resilience. You must anchor yourself in values so deep that no storm can uproot them. This is not easy. It requires patience. It requires sacrifice. It requires saying no when yes would be easier. But in the end, that